In today's video, we are making our scratch marble cake recipe. This is based on our yellow scratch cake recipe, which we've recently updated. It now makes even more batter, and we're using a version of the reverse creaming method that's slightly different, but we think it's easier to follow, and the result is a super moist cake. So what I'm starting out with is 3 8-inch cake pans. We have already greased and floured them and added a circle of wax paper to the bottom of each so that nothing will stick. Okay, so before we get too far into mixing up this recipe, I first wanted to go ahead and get this step out of the way. What we did here is we combined 4 tablespoons of our unsweetened cocoa powder with 3 tablespoons of hot water, and that creates this chocolate that you see right here in the bowl. A little bit later on, we're going to be combining this with some reserved batter so that we can create chocolate batter without having to make a whole different chocolate cake. So just go ahead and do this first so you don't have to spend time on it later, and then we're just going to set it to the side. Okay, so what I'm doing now is mixing all of the dry ingredients. That's the cake flour, sugar, baking powder, baking soda, and salt. And after it's mixed for about 30 seconds, turn it off and still just give it a quick stir with your spatula just to make sure that everything is well combined, even any ingredients that kind of built up on the side of the bowl. And the next step that we're going to do is we're going to add our 2 sticks of butter. So I'm going to start the mixer again on low speed, and we'll add our, super close, 2 sticks of butter, slightly softened. So I'm just cutting smallish slices. Okay, so we're going to let this mix until our flour is well coated with the butter and it's going to take on the look of wet sand. Okay, just so you can see when it's ready, you can kind of take it in your hand and mash it, and it just clumps together a little bit, but the mixture itself still has a sandy appearance. Okay, so I'm just going to take my spatula and do one more little turnover of your mixture just to make sure everything is well combined. And now we are going to move on to adding our room temperature eggs one at a time. So I'm still going to keep it on low speed. And I have my eggs just in this little, there went 2. Ideally, you would do 1 at a time, but we're just going to keep going. And just kind of watch as you pour each egg in. You're going to let it mix until the yolk disappears, and then you just go on and mix the next one. Okay, so I'm just going to let this mix at, I have mine at speed number 2 on our mixer. Okay. Now I'm going to turn it down slightly, and we're going to move on to adding our buttermilk, which I've already added our vanilla to. Not sure if you can see that. So we're just going to, while it's on low speed, we're going to slowly add our buttermilk. Okay, so now I have my timer on for 2 minutes. We're going to do a minute, the first minute, then we'll stop and scrape the bowl, and then we'll do the second minute. Okay, so I just stopped the mixer. The first minute has passed, and I'm taking my spatula just to make sure that there's no little pockets of unmixed batter or flour or anything like that at the bottom. Okay. So now we're going to move on to just one more minute. Just mixing at speed number 2. You can see the batter's getting nice and fluffy. Okay, so we just finished that last minute of mixing, that second minute, and now we have this nice pretty batter. We're going to reserve some of it that we're going to turn into chocolate batter. Now we have 1.5 cups of our batter, our yellow cake batter, that I'm combining with the chocolate that we made earlier. And just go ahead and use your spatula to get every last bit out of your measuring cups. Okay, so we'll just quickly combine everything until the yellow batter becomes chocolate. Okay, so now we have our combined cocoa and the batter that we reserved, and we are ready to start adding the batter to the pans. Okay, now I'm adding 1 cup of batter to each pan. Okay, so now I'm adding my chocolate batter, just a few spoonfuls into each pan. Okay, so now I'm going to just take my spatula and drag it through my batter. And you don't want to over swirl, but I want to go ahead and do this step now, and then later we're still going to add just a little bit more batter, and we'll give it maybe a little bit more of a swirl a little bit later. Okay. So now I'm going to add more yellow, and now I'm measuring out by about 1/4 cup for each pan. I'm just scraping out the remaining batter. Okay, so here are our 3 pans of batter. I'm just going to add just a little bit of our remaining, we still got a little batter left, and we just weighed our pans, and the 2 pans in front were a little bit lighter than the one in back, so that's why I'm putting a little bit more batter in here. But I'm going to scrape the bowl with my spatula just to make sure we get every last bit, and I will put this little bit in our 3rd pan. Okay, just so we don't have any big, I'm not taking it all the way down since I've already done that before, but I want to make sure that these blobs of chocolate that we just put in get swirled. Okay. All right, so that should do it. So next we are going to bake our cake layers, and we'll meet back when they're ready to flip out. Okay, so I have just removed the cakes from the oven. They baked for about 27 minutes, but that might vary, so you want to check on them a little bit before that. We're going to let them cool while they're still in the pans on the baking rack for about 5 minutes before we flip them out. Okay, so you can see that I have now flipped out my cake layers. They are each on a cake board that has been wrapped in foil, and that's so that we can reuse the cake boards later if we want to. And now I'm going to wrap each cake layer in plastic wrap and then foil, and we're going to place them in the freezer, and we're going to let them chill probably overnight, but we do this with all of our cakes. We like to freeze them for at least a few hours. and that just helps to make them even more moist. Okay, so it's the next day, and as you can see, I have filled my 3 cake layers with our chocolate buttercream, and now we are settling them. This is an optional step, but I think it's really helpful. If you don't settle your cake layers, then you might have problems with the frosting bulging a little bit later, which will mess up your pretty cake. So as you can see, I have 2 8-inch cake pans resting on top of our cake, which we've wrapped in plastic wrap. You want to settle them for at least 3 hours. You can also settle them overnight. And now we are going to move on to frosting the cake. Okay, so I have now frosted my cake, or at least crumb coated the cake with a thin layer of our chocolate buttercream frosting, and I'm gonna quickly decorate the top with a 1M tip. This is a large star tip. We're gonna start in the middle, and we're just gonna spiral clockwise. And this is just a really pretty way to decorate the tops of your cakes, and also really easy. Okay, just go all the way around. Okay, so now around the sides, I'm piping this pretty pattern using a small, or actually I guess you would just call this a medium-sized star tip. This is a Wilton tip 21, and we're just gonna pipe right on top of that crumb-coated layer. And the way that we do it is you go in kind of straight on with your piping tip, and we do something really similar to a rosette where you start piping and you circle around. With a rosette, you would stop your piping and then create a new rosette. But with this, it's more of a continuous line of rosettes that slightly overlap. So my first one I'm gonna let come just slightly above the top edge of the cake. That way we don't have to worry with borders. And you can see it's just a continuous, whoops. It's just a continuous string of rosettes. I also think it's helpful to, once you have your line of rosettes that you like, just make note of how many you piped. For me, it's 5. And so I just kind of count to myself as I'm going, just to make sure that I don't have some rows that have more than others. So I'm just going to continue my piping all the way around, and we'll meet right back. Okay, I just wanted to give you a quick look at our piping while I turn it around. I think it looks really pretty, and now we are going to slice the cake. Let's see our marbling. Okay, so it looks good. Okay, so that's it. I hope you will give this marble cake recipe a try. It's one of our favorites. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.